My lawyer husband cheated with his coworker and stole $200K from our son's trust fund. But when I confronted him with my son calling his mistress mom, my millionaire mother-in-law destroyed his legal career and left him with nothing. I'm 32 years old. I'm a pediatric nurse, and what happened 3 months ago literally destroyed my 8-year marriage and almost ripped my son out of my arms. The thing is, when you come home after a weekend shift at the hospital and find another woman wearing your apron in your kitchen, you already know your life just exploded into 1,000 pieces. But when your 6-year-old son runs toward that woman screaming, "Mommy," that's when you feel like the floor disappears beneath your feet. I guess I should start at the beginning. When I met Thomas in college, because at that time he seemed like the perfect guy. You know, he was studying law, came from a family with money, was charming with my parents, and I thought I'd won the lottery or something. We got married when he finished his degree and got a job at a big firm, one of those places where everyone wears expensive suits and works until 9 at night, and at first everything was fine. I mean, he worked a ton but made good money, and I was finishing my pediatric specialization, so we were both busy building our careers. Tyler was born when I was 26, and honestly, he was the most beautiful baby I'd ever seen. And look, I work with babies all day, but this one was mine, and he was perfect. Thomas seemed happy too, though he was always working. Like he'd come home when Tyler was already asleep, and on weekends he had to review cases or make calls with clients. But I thought that was just the life of a corporate lawyer and that eventually things would calm down. About 2 years ago, Thomas started talking a lot about Allison, his coworker, his work wife as he called her. And at first it didn't bother me because it sounded like a normal professional relationship. You know, that person you work on projects with and share office stress with. He started mentioning her more and more often. Like, Allison said this. Allison thinks we should do such and such on that case. Allison helped me with this presentation. And I registered the information but didn't give it importance. I guess because I was too busy with my shifts at the hospital and taking care of Tyler. Things started getting weird about a year ago. I don't know. Thomas was more distant, coming home even later. On weekends he'd say he had to go to the office, but when I called him, he wouldn't answer for hours. Once I found a receipt from an expensive restaurant in his suit, one of those places where dinner costs like $300 per person, and when I asked him about it, he said it was a dinner with clients, but the receipt only showed 2 people and there was no company name. I started feeling that thing in my stomach. You know, that feeling that something's not right, but you don't have concrete proof, so you feel crazy for even thinking it. I tried talking to him a couple times, like, "Hey, we need to spend more time together as a family. Tyler misses you. I miss you." But he always had the same answer, that he was working to give us a good life, that in a few months things would calm down, that he just needed a little more time to consolidate his position at the firm. 6 months ago, things got worse. Thomas started working even on Sundays, and when he was home, he basically lived glued to his phone, sending messages. And once I saw him smile while typing something, and when I asked what it was, he said nothing. Just a meme a coworker sent him, but the way he put away the phone so quickly made me suspicious. Tyler started saying weird things too, like Daddy has a new friend at work. Daddy says she's very smart. And I thought, well, it's Allison again. But the way Tyler said it sounded like he'd met her in person, not just heard her mentioned. One day I asked Tyler if he'd met Daddy's friend, and he said yes. That Daddy had taken him to the office one Saturday and that she'd given him candy and played with him. And that seemed strange to me because Thomas had never mentioned taking Tyler to work. And when I asked Thomas about it, he got super defensive and said it wasn't a big deal, that he'd had to go to the office for a moment and didn't want to leave him alone at home. About 4 months ago, I found something that basically confirmed all my suspicions, but in a way I never imagined. I was looking for tax documents in Thomas's study, you know, because we needed to file our return and he was always behind as usual. And I found a folder with account statements from a family trust I didn't know existed. The thing is, Thomas came from a family with money. His father had died when he was 20 and left him a trust that was supposed to be for his education and eventually for Tyler, but the documents I found showed huge withdrawals. Like, we're talking about $200,000 in the last 2 years for things that had nothing to do with education or legitimate family expenses. There was an $80,000 withdrawal with the description real estate investment, another $50,000 for business startup capital, and when I looked at the dates, they were all recent. From the last 18 months. I kept searching, totally in detective mode now, and found more documents, including papers for a property that Thomas had bought but that wasn't in his name. It was in the name of an LLC. And when I investigated the formation documents for that LLC, I saw there were two members, Thomas Mitchell and Allison Crawford. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I literally thought I was going to throw up right there in the study. There was more stuff, like credit card statements showing purchases at jewelry stores, hotels, restaurants, always two charges together on the same dates. And when I cross-referenced the dates with my shift calendar, I saw the pattern. All those outings were when I was working night shifts or weekends. I also found printed emails, because Thomas is one of those people who prints important things even though it's 2025, and the emails were between him and Allison talking about their plans for the future, using the trust money to start a business together, dates they'd had, and one in particular that said something like, "Soon we'll be able to be together completely. I just need to find the right moment to tell her." I didn't say anything to Thomas immediately because I needed to think. I needed to process what I'd discovered and decide what to do. I made copies of everything, like I scanned every document and saved them in an email account Thomas didn't know about, and I also took photos with my phone just in case. I kept acting normal for a couple weeks, which was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, like serving dinner and asking how his day was knowing he'd probably been with her, putting Tyler to bed and reading him a story knowing our marriage was basically a lie. I was waiting for the right moment to confront him, or maybe waiting to find more evidence. I'm not sure. But basically, I was on autopilot, trying not to collapse emotionally. Then came that weekend, 3 months ago, when my life exploded in the most horrible way possible. I had a 12-hour shift scheduled on Saturday and another on Sunday, because a coworker had gotten sick and they needed coverage in the pediatric intensive care unit, and Thomas said he'd take care of Tyler all weekend, that it was no problem. Sunday, my shift ended around 7 in the evening, but I managed to leave at 6 because we'd had a quiet night, so I decided not to let him know and come home early to surprise Tyler. Maybe order pizza and watch a movie before he went to sleep. I got home around 6:30, went in through the front door, and the first weird thing I noticed was that there were women's shoes at the entrance, some black heels that definitely weren't mine. And I thought, maybe Thomas hired someone to clean the house or something. I walked toward the kitchen, and there she was. Allison, wearing my blue flower apron, the one my mom had given me when I moved in with Thomas, cooking something on my stove. I froze in the kitchen doorway. I literally couldn't process what I was seeing, and she turned around and saw me and her face. God, her face was total shock but also something else, like annoyance at being interrupted. Before I could say anything, I heard footsteps running down the stairs and Tyler appeared yelling, "Mommy! Mommy! You have to try what Mommy made for dinner!" And he ran straight to Allison, not to me. Allison crouched down and Tyler hugged her and she looked at me with this expression that still haunts me at night. Like it was a mix of defiance and possession. Like saying, "He's mine now. This family is mine now." Thomas appeared behind Tyler and when he saw me, his face went white, like he literally lost all color. I couldn't speak. I felt like my throat had completely closed, and I just looked between him, Allison, and Tyler, who kept clinging to her like it was the most normal thing in the world. Finally, I managed to say, "What the hell is going on here?" And Thomas started with an explanation that sounded like he'd rehearsed it 1,000 times. Like, "Megan, I can explain. Allison had problems with her apartment, there was water damage or something, and she just needed somewhere to stay temporarily." I said, "Temporarily? She's wearing my apron and my son is calling her mom. That's not temporary, Thomas." And he tried to come closer to me, but I raised my hand to stop him because honestly, I felt like if he touched me, I was going to explode. Tyler looked confused, looking between all of us. And then Allison had the nerve to say, "Tyler, honey, why don't you go upstairs and wash your hands for dinner?" And Tyler obeyed immediately. Went up the stairs without even looking at me. That's what broke me. Seeing my son obey this woman who had basically invaded my house and stolen my family. As soon as Tyler disappeared upstairs, I turned to Thomas and said, "How long? How long has she been living here?" And he didn't answer, so I knew. Is there more than a weekend? Probably weeks, maybe months. Every time I worked long shifts, she was here playing house with my husband and my son. I ran upstairs to Tyler's room. I needed to see if he was okay. I needed to hug him. And when I entered his room, I saw there were things I didn't recognize, like new toys I hadn't bought. And on his nightstand, there was a framed photo of Tyler with Thomas and Allison at some park, all smiling like a happy family. Tyler came out of the bathroom and saw me crying. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. And he said, "Mommy, why are you crying?" And I said, Come here, sweetheart, I need to talk to you. I sat on his bed and put him on my lap and asked him, Tyler, honey, who is that lady downstairs? And he told me it's Allison, Daddy's friend. She comes when you're not here and cooks yummy things and plays with me. And I said, but I heard you call her mom earlier. Why did you call her that? Tyler shrugged. You know, in that way kids do when they don't. I understand why something's important. And said, Daddy said I could call her mom too because you work a lot and she's here more. That it's like having two moms. I felt like someone had stabbed a knife in my chest. My own husband had told our 6-year-old son to basically replace me with his mistress. That having two moms was normal, that I didn't matter because I worked a lot trying to save other children's lives. I told Tyler very calmly, even though inside I was destroyed. Honey, I'm your only mom. Allison is just Daddy's friend, and it's not okay that they told you to call her mom. Do you understand? And he nodded. But I could see in his eyes he was confused, because obviously Thomas and Allison had been working on this for a long time. I went downstairs carrying Tyler. He was clinging to my neck, and found Thomas and Allison in the living room, her sitting on my couch like it belonged to her. I told Thomas I need this woman out of my house right now, and Allison had the nerve to say, this is his house too. He invited me to stay. And I literally yelled at her, I don't care who invited you. This is my house, my family, and you're leaving now or I'm calling the police. Thomas tried to calm me down, saying, Megan, don't make a scene in front of Tyler. We can talk about this like adults. And I said, adults? You want to talk like adults when you've been teaching our son to call your mistress, mom, when you've been using your father's trust fund money to maintain your affair? Yes, Thomas. I found all the documents, all the emails, everything. Thomas's face changed completely when I said that, like he went from trying to be conciliatory to being defensive and angry. He told me you had no right to go through my things. Those are private documents. And I laughed. I literally laughed in his face, even though I was crying at the same time, and said, private. We're married, Thomas. That's family money. It's Tyler's future. And you're wasting it on your affair with her? Allison got up from the couch and said, this isn't an affair. Thomas and I love each other, and we're going to be together. You're the one who's in the way here. And that was what made me completely lose my mind. I yelled at Tyler to go up to his room immediately. He started crying, but obeyed. And as soon as I heard his door close, I turned to Allison and said, get out of my house now, or I swear to God I won't be responsible for what I do. Thomas got between us, which was ironic considering he was the one who'd caused all this, and said, Megan, calm down. And I said, don't tell me to calm down. Not after what you've done. Not after using our son as part of your little family fantasy. I asked him how long they'd been together, and at first he didn't want to say, but finally Allison answered for him. She said, we've been together for 2 years. Since we started working on that big case together. 2 years, Megan. And he was going to ask you for a divorce, but he never found the right moment. 2 years. All the information rearranged in my head. Like all the times he came home late, all the weekends he was supposedly working, all the mysterious messages. Everything made sense now. I told both of them to leave the house. That I didn't care where they went, but I wasn't going to sleep under the same roof as them that night. Thomas said this is my house too, and I'm not leaving. That if anyone was leaving, it was going to be me. And that's when I knew this was going to get ugly. Like it wasn't just an affair that was going to end with apologies and couples therapy. This was the end of my marriage, and it was probably going to end in a horrible legal battle. I went up to my room. Well, our room, although it didn't feel like ours anymore, and pulled suitcases out of the closet and started packing my clothes and my things. Everything I could take. Thomas came in and said, what are you doing? And I answered, I'm leaving, and I'm taking Tyler with me. I'm not going to leave my son here so you two can continue with your little happy family game. Thomas told me I couldn't just take Tyler like that he had rights as a father. And I said, it's funny you talk about parental rights when you've been teaching our son to betray me just like you did. I finished packing my things. It was like 3 suitcases and several bags, and then I went to Tyler's room and packed his clothes, his favorite toys, his books, all the essentials. Tyler was crying, asking what was happening, why I was packing his things. And I said, honey, we're going to stay with Grandma for a while. It's going to be an adventure. And although he was still confused, he stopped crying as much. I went downstairs carrying suitcases, Tyler carrying his backpack with his favorite toys, and Thomas tried to block the door, but I said, move or I'll call the police and tell them exactly what's going on here. how you've been using our son in your affair, how you've embezzled the trust fund money. That made him move. I guess the threat of involving the police scared him. And I left the house with Tyler. We put all the things in my car, and I drove straight to Evelyn's house. Thomas's mom. The thing is, Evelyn and I had always had a good relationship. She was like the mom I never had. You know, my own mother had died when I was 15, and Evelyn had emotionally adopted me since I started dating Thomas. I arrived at her house around 9 at night. She was surprised to see us, but as soon as she saw my face, she knew something bad had happened. Tyler was emotionally exhausted and fell asleep on the couch while I told Evelyn everything, every detail, from the trust fund documents to finding Allison in my kitchen to hearing my son call her mom. Evelyn cried with me, hugged me while I completely fell apart, and told me I could stay there as long as I needed, that she would support me in whatever I decided to do. She also told me something that surprised me, that she'd suspected something was going on with Thomas, that at recent family dinners he'd been distant and had mentioned Allison too much, but that she never thought it would go this far. She told me that her husband, Thomas's father, had been unfaithful to her when Thomas was a teenager. That's why they'd been about to divorce before he died, and that Thomas had sworn he'd never be like his father. But it seems in the end, history repeated itself. Evelyn told me she wasn't going to defend her son this time, that what he'd done was unforgivable, especially involving Tyler that way, and that she was going to help me do the right thing. The next few days were a whirlwind of calls, meetings, and difficult decisions. The first thing I did Monday morning was call a family lawyer that a friend had recommended, a woman named Patricia, who had a reputation for being ruthless in divorce cases. I told her the whole situation, showed her the copies of the documents I'd found, the emails, everything. And she told me I had a very strong case not only for divorce but for primary custody of Tyler, and to report the misuse of the trust fund. Patricia explained that what Thomas had done with the trust money was technically illegal. Like trusts have specific rules about how the money can be used, and using funds meant for education for an affair and a personal business with your mistress definitely violated those terms. Evelyn accompanied me to several of these meetings with the lawyer, and she also took her own action that honestly I didn't expect, but that I'll be grateful for forever. It turned out that Evelyn was one of the trust administrators, along with the bank that managed it, because when her husband died, he'd established that she had to approve large withdrawals to ensure the money was used appropriately. Thomas had been forging her signature on some documents, or using a general authorization she'd signed years ago for medical emergencies, never thinking her son would abuse that. Evelyn reported everything to the bank and the other trust administrators, filed a formal complaint documenting all the unauthorized withdrawals, and basically initiated a complete investigation into the misuse of funds. This caused a domino effect that none of us fully anticipated. The bank immediately froze the trust while they investigated, which meant Thomas no longer had access to that money, and it also meant that the property he'd bought with Allison was technically at risk because it had been purchased with basically stolen funds. Patricia filed an emergency petition for temporary custody, arguing that Thomas had demonstrated extremely poor judgment by introducing his partner into Tyler's life in a way that caused parental confusion and alienation. Like in the documents, we explained how he'd taught Tyler to call Allison mom, how he'd been living this double life, and how this was emotionally affecting our son. The judge gave us an emergency hearing that same week. It was a Wednesday, I think, and it was probably one of the hardest days of my life. Thomas had his own lawyer, one from the firm where he worked, obviously, and they basically argued that I was being dramatic, that Allison was just helping with Tyler while I worked long shifts, that it was better for Tyler to have more caring adults in his life. But when the judge read the documents Patricia had submitted, including the statements about how Tyler had been instructed to call Allison mom, the evidence of the embezzled money, and especially when Evelyn testified about how Thomas had abused the trust without her knowledge, the judge's face changed completely. The judge ordered temporary primary custody for me. Thomas could see Tyler, but only with supervision until a complete psychological evaluation of the family situation was done. Thomas was furious after the hearing. He waited for me outside the court and started yelling at me that I was destroying his life, that I'd taken his son from him, that his own mother had betrayed him. And I just told him, "You destroyed this, Thomas. You did this. Now you have to live with the consequences." The situation got even worse for him when the firm where he worked found out what was happening. It turned out that one of the other partners at the firm was friends with one of the trust administrators. We live in a not-so-big city, so everyone knows each other in those circles, And when the partner found out that Thomas was involved in a scandal of embezzling funds from a trust, even if it was his own trust, they decided it was a professional ethics problem that needed to be investigated. The firm launched its own internal investigation, not just about the trust, but about the relationship between Thomas and Allison, because it turned out they also had strict policies about relationships between partners and associates, and Thomas had never reported his relationship with Allison to human resources as he was supposed to. The investigation revealed that Thomas had been giving Allison preferential case assignments, that he'd pushed for her to be considered for partnership even though she didn't have enough experience yet, and basically that he'd been using his position to advance her career while keeping their relationship secret. This was a massive violation of the firm's policies and, more importantly, for them, put the firm at risk of lawsuits from other employees who could argue they'd been discriminated against in favor of Allison. Thomas and Allison were placed on administrative leave while the investigation lasted, which meant they basically couldn't work but were still technically employed. And this was like 2 weeks after I'd left the house. At that point, I was living with Evelyn and Tyler, working my normal shifts at the hospital, and trying to maintain some routine for Tyler, who was obviously confused and affected by everything. I took him to see a child psychologist that Patricia recommended, a specialist in parental alienation cases, and after several sessions, the doctor confirmed that Tyler had been manipulated to see Allison as an alternative mother figure, that this was causing confusion about his loyalties and his family identity, but that with therapy and time he could recover as long as stability was maintained with his primary mother, meaning me. The firm's investigation continued for several weeks, and during that time more things came to light that honestly shocked me even after everything I already knew. They found emails between Thomas and Allison where they discussed using confidential client information from the firm for their own businesses, like they had plans to start a consulting firm using contacts and strategies they'd learned from firm cases, which was basically intellectual property theft and massive violation of attorney-client confidentiality. They also found that Thomas had used firm resources, like assistants and investigators' time, to work on his personal project with Allison, which was basically theft of time and company resources. The firm finally made the decision to fire both of them, Thomas and Allison, and not only that, but they reported the situation to the State Bar Association because the violations of attorney-client confidentiality were serious enough to justify a professional ethics investigation. This meant Thomas hadn't just lost his job but could potentially lose his license to practice law, like we're talking about disbarment, which would basically end his career as a lawyer permanently. When I found out about this, I felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, part of me felt bad because this was the man I'd married, my son's father, and seeing him lose everything was hard somehow. But on the other hand, I felt it was justice, that he was finally paying real consequences for his actions. The trust also moved forward with actions against Thomas. The administrators voted to permanently revoke his access to the funds and established that any remaining money would be managed directly by the bank for Tyler's benefit until he turned 25. They also initiated legal actions to recover the money Thomas had embezzled, which meant they'd probably have to sell the property he'd bought with Allison and possibly seize other assets of Thomas's to recover the $200,000 he'd taken out. Allison, who supposedly had been living in my house because her apartment had water damage, suddenly found another place to live, which made me think that apartment story had probably been a lie from the beginning, that it had simply been part of the plan for her to permanently move in with Thomas and start their new life together. The divorce proceedings also moved forward. Patricia filed all the necessary documents, and basically we asked for primary custody for me with supervised visits for Thomas until he completed psychological evaluations and therapy, division of assets that took into account the trust money Thomas had wasted, and child support for Tyler. Thomas tried to fight for shared custody, but his own behavior, documented in witness statements, reports from Tyler's psychologist, and the results of the firm and trust investigations, basically destroyed his arguments. His lawyer advised him to accept a settlement because going to trial would only expose his actions more publicly and could result in an even worse outcome for him. During all this time, Tyler was in therapy, and seeing his progress was probably the only good thing about this horrible situation. At first, he was confused and sad, asked about his dad, asked about Allison too, which hurt me. But over time, he started to understand that mom means something specific, that he has one mom who is me, and that Allison was just someone who was in his life temporarily. The psychologist worked with him using games and art therapy to process his emotions and taught me how to respond to his questions in a way that was honest but age-appropriate. He started calling me mommy again without confusion, started sleeping better. And although he still had difficult days, I could see he was healing. Thomas finally accepted a divorce settlement about a month ago. I got primary custody. He has visits every other weekend, but has to complete therapy and parenting classes before those visits can be unsupervised. The house was sold and we split the money, though Patricia managed to get me a larger portion considering the trust money Thomas had wasted. Furniture and belongings were also divided, and honestly, I didn't want anything that reminded me of that life, so I basically let him keep most things and I bought everything new to start fresh. The Bar Association investigation is still in process. It can take months or even years before they make a decision about his license. But meanwhile, Thomas is technically unemployed, looking for work outside of law because his reputation in the local legal industry is basically destroyed. Allison also lost her job, obviously. And according to what I heard from mutual friends, she moved to another city, probably trying to start over where nobody knows her story. I don't know if she and Thomas are still together. Honestly, I don't care. That part of my life is closed. Evelyn has been incredible through all this. She helped me, not just legally and financially, but emotionally. Taking care of Tyler when I had long shifts, helping me look for a new house, basically being the family I needed when mine fell apart. We found a small house in a better neighborhood, with good schools, and we're moving there next month. It's going to be a new beginning for Tyler and me. The divorce was officially finalized last week. I signed the papers in Patricia's office. It was surreal to see 8 years of marriage reduced to legal documents and signatures, but I also felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Tyler asked me yesterday if Daddy is going to come back to live with us someday, and I told him the truth in a way he could understand, that Daddy and I are going to live in separate houses now, but that we both love him very much, that will never change. He thought for a moment and then said, "It's okay, Mommy. I like being with you at Grandma's house, and it's going to be fine in our new house too." That simple acceptance from a 6-year-old made me cry, but this time, they were tears of relief more than pain. I don't know what will happen with Thomas in the long term, if he'll get his license back, if he'll find another career, if he and Allison will stay together, or if eventually that relationship will also collapse under the weight of everything they destroyed to be together. Honestly, it's not my problem anymore. It sounds harsh, but it's the truth. I have to focus on Tyler and rebuilding our life. I keep working at the hospital. My patients and their families remind me every day how lucky I am to have Tyler healthy and with me, and that perspective helps me on difficult days. Evelyn says she's going to help me with the down payment for the new house, that she wants Tyler to have a stable home, and that she considers that her way of compensating for what her son did, though I've told her 1,000 times she doesn't have to compensate for anything, that what Thomas did isn't her fault. The new house has a big yard where Tyler can play. It's near an excellent school, and has 3 bedrooms, one for me, one for Tyler, and an extra one that Evelyn says she can use when she visits. Which makes me happy because she's basically the only family we have left now besides some close friends. Tyler is excited about the move. He drew how he wants to decorate his new room, with posters of his favorite superheroes and a bookshelf for his books. I'm excited too. Nervous but excited. It's the first time in my adult life that I'm going to live completely on my own terms, without depending on anyone else. Sometimes I think about everything that happened and wonder if there were signs I should have seen before, if I could have prevented all this somehow. But therapy, yes, I'm also in therapy, is helping me understand that what Thomas did were his decisions, not mine, that I didn't cause his infidelity by working a lot or being a bad wife, that he chose to betray me and use our son as part of his fantasy. That understanding frees me from the guilt I carried at the beginning, when I thought, maybe if I'd worked less, maybe if I'd been more attentive, maybe if I'd been different somehow. But now I know it doesn't matter what I would have done differently. If someone decides to betray you, they'll find the way and the excuse. Tyler started first grade this year at his new school. He's making friends. His teachers say he's a sweet and smart kid, and although he still has moments where he asks about his dad or gets sad, in general, he's adapting well. Thomas sees him every other Saturday. For now, the visits are still supervised by a social worker at a family visitation center, and according to reports, the visits go well. Tyler has fun with his dad, but there's no longer confusion about roles or loyalties. Eventually, the visits can be unsupervised if Thomas completes all the court requirements and if Tyler's psychologist confirms it's appropriate, but that won't happen for several months at least. Yesterday, Tyler and I were packing more boxes for the move. We found old photos from when he was a baby, photos where Thomas and I looked happy and in love, and Tyler asked why Daddy and I aren't happy together anymore. I explained it to him as simply as I could. That sometimes people change and what made them happy before doesn't make them happy anymore. That sometimes love isn't enough when people don't treat each other well, and that it's okay to feel sad about that. He hugged me and said, "I love you, Mommy." And I told him I love you more, my love, more than anything in the world. Moments like that remind me why I went through all this, why I fought so hard in court, why I stayed strong when I felt like I was falling apart. Because Tyler deserves to grow up knowing his mom loves him unconditionally, that his mom will fight for him, that his mom will never use him as a pawn in adult games. The move is in 2 weeks. Evelyn already hired a moving company so we don't have to worry about carrying heavy furniture, and several friends from the hospital offered to come help unpack and organize the new house. I plan to have a small housewarming party once we're settled in. Nothing fancy, just pizza and drinks with the people who supported us during these horrible months. Tyler wants to invite his new friends from school too. He says he wants to show them his new room, and seeing his excitement fills me with hope for the future. This isn't the fairy tale happy ending where everything is perfect, but it's real, it's ours, and it's enough.